There was a night long, long ago when I was a young man. I was still in high school. I had gone out on a date with my then girlfriend, and I was driving my dad's Pinto. Yes, it was a Pinto, 4 speed, 2 door, yellow Pinto. Fabulous car. Go ahead and laugh at me if you want. I love that car. Anyway, I was out on a date that night with my girlfriend. We had gone out to dinner or something, and we ended up back at her parents' house for the evening and spent a nice night with her parents, just getting to know them more. I had met them before and had chatted with them before, but in the course of us dating, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time with them, and so that night we spent a lot of time playing games and getting to know the folks. And there was a little bit of tension between my girlfriend's parents and I. At the time, I was younger than she was. She was older than I was. I guess that makes sense when I say I was younger than she was. And she was older. Anyway, so her parents didn't like me much. But in the end, we had a nice night. I said goodbye to everyone, and I headed out in that little Pinto. Now, it just so happens on that night there also was a blizzard happening. Now, in Minnesota, it's a blizzard. We drive in blizzards. That's the way we do it, or at least we used to before all of the weather changed and we no longer get any snow. But back then, we used to get lots of snow and cold and blowing and blizzards and crazy stuff. And so when I left their house, and they lived out in the country on this little windy road that went through the back roads, and then eventually came out onto a highway that I could take and then go home and follow my way home. But on that little windy back road, as I was trying to get out, all I really could do was to see the tracks in the snow in front of me. There was so much snow blowing and everything. It was really hard to drive. But again, in Minnesota, there was tracks. Okay, I've got something to follow. I can go as long as I don't really stop with this little Pinto, which is a rear-wheel drive vehicle. And again, if you're young, you don't know. But drive along, you got to keep your momentum going. And so I'm following these tracks. And I come to a point where like a bunch of tracks kind of like split apart, and I have to choose which ones I'm going to take. And I know I'm going around a really sharp corner, and there's a little bend right there, and there's a river that's right there, and I know it's very sharp, and I was going slow. But I picked the tracks that kind of made the cut the sharpest, so I could stay on the inside of the road as I go around the corner to the river. Unfortunately, those tracks that I chose were the tracks that were of someone else who had driven off the road and down into the ditch by the river. And so, boom, off I went in my little Pinto, stuck in the snow. No chance of me getting that car out, especially in the dark, in a blizzard. There I sat. Well, back then, there were no cell phones. I didn't have, a pocket phone, so the only option I had was to go for help if I'm going to get help. So what I chose to do was to leave the car and follow the road back into the woods and go back to their house, my girlfriend's house. And so I did. I got there and knocked on the door, and her dad came out. And it was all angry. What are you, youngster? What are you doing? And I explained what happened. Oh, don't know how to drive. Darn kids these days over the blizzard. And just gave me, read me the riot act, right? And I young guy, and I felt bad, and I was like, oh, geez. But they let me use his phone. I called my dad, let him know what happened. Eventually, my dad actually came out and picked me up that night in the blizzard and got me home. And so we left the car next day, went down there with a tow truck, pulled it out, got the car out of the ditch. Everything in the end was fine. I, bruised my ego. I had to listen to what then was my girlfriend's father, eventually became my father-in-law. And all that transpired on a Saturday night. So we had Sunday to get the car out, which we did, and then Monday I was back to school. Now, it just so happens that my girlfriend lived right next to one of our English teachers. It's a small town, and we all know each other. We all talk, and we all know each other's vehicles and things like that. And so my teacher knew that that was my dad's Pinto that was stuck in a ditch down by the river just past their house. And so when I went to school on Monday, she was joking with me and asking me about the fact that I had the car stuck in the ditch, and she thought that, oh yeah, I thought that was your car, that yellow Pinto. And I said, yeah, it was. And I told her the story of how I was just trying to follow the tracks and ended up, choosing the wrong set that had gone down into the ditch and everything. And my English teacher says to me, well, that's funny. You must have followed the tracks that Raymond had, because that's where he was stuck just before you. And that would be my father-in-law. The tracks I followed to get stuck in the ditch was the guy I had to run back to the house and ask for help for, who read me the riot act that young kids driving out the middle and getting stuck in the road, and that was my father-in-law. Now, years later, my wife and I divorced and continue to be friends to this day. My ex-wife and I have been remarried, and she's off with her new relationship, and we all get along and we're just fine. And over the years, I have seen Ray since we got divorced, and of course, when we were married, he was a big part of our lives, and I have many more stories like that of Ray. And the reason I'm telling or reminiscing this story, and this is much more of a personal vlog tonight than I think any of them that I have done so far. But Raymond is near the end. And may not even last until I get this vlog published. I mean, that's how close to the end we are for Raymond's journey. And it's been surreal, I guess, the last few days, reminiscing and telling some of those stories. And I'm sure we're going to tell many more over the weeks to come now. And it really got me thinking just about life and about what we leave behind. And Raymond's leaving a lot behind. He has quite the legacy. And if you could count your legacy in laughter and in joy, his would be huge. After he retired from the full-time construction work that he did a bunch of different odd jobs and things, but eventually he found his way to be a Walmart greeter. And I got to tell you, I think that job suited him perfectly. Him dancing around and telling jokes and shaking hands and just having a good time with just strangers, people going to Walmart. It's one of those jobs that he probably should have been doing all of his life, but he found it after retirement and had a fantastic time with it. So much so that he had a blossoming of people that were like groupies, that he made it on the news and did all kinds of things with his Walmart greeter experience, and just had so much fun with it. And so if a legacy could be counted in smiles, could be counted in laughter, then I think Raymond's going to have the greatest, biggest, most grand legacy of all.